U.S.-led coalition attacks Houthi targets in Yemen, and World War III was trending on Twitter last night. And there is a real fear of escalation. I'll talk about what if there is any real threat after we watch this video, and there might be a few other videos to talk about on this. But let me just give you the details on what's going on.
About the strikes, what do we know about the targets?
Well, Anderson, the importance of the Red Sea cannot be denied. You have 50% global seaborne trade that passes here. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is an absolutely critical narrow area that ships go through into the Red Sea and then up to the Suez Canal. There were more than a dozen strikes across Yemen from north to south, across a variety of targets. We're learning more and more by the minute, really, of what these targets were. But they were at least in 5 different locations, if not more, in and around the capital of Sana'a, over here on the western coast of Yemen, and then in several other locations up and down this south axis in Yemen. Now, we are hearing from both the coalition. The Houthis have said that a number of air bases and airports were hit, along with several camps. They mentioned the 22nd Brigade camp in the Taiza district, which the assets that were there. They hit radar systems, they hit drone storage sites, as Oren touched on. The drones have been absolutely a critical part of the Houthis have been carrying out storage and launch sites. And then in terms of what assets were used, this is just what the U.S. used in tonight's series of strikes. We also know RAF, the British Air Force, as well as a British destroyer. They have been out there. But the USS Eisenhower Strike Group has basically been out in the Red Sea, serving as a deterrent to Iran and other countries. The U.S. trying to send a message to not widen this conflict with that very formidable strike group. But fighter jets, U.S. fighter jets, tonight strikes along with
one. And yes, I understand that this has been the U.S.'s policy for a long time, certainly since the Cold War, but even before then, and even my favorite president, or one of my favorite presidents of all time, had a similar philosophy and similar approach. But in today's, especially as a result of the reasoning for why this whole thing started in the first place, the concept that the idea of peace through strength, like what Trump says, peace through strength, or a deterrent, you're being out there being a deterrent. I don't know if that necessarily works in this day and age, because especially now with the U.S. essentially, for lack of a better way of describing it, with the U.S. essentially supporting and especially with the U.S. essentially supporting and, making excuses for genocide with the Israelis and Palestinians, it really has put us even into a darker place around the world, where now other countries who know that they aren't exactly on the U.S.'s favorite list, they're not exactly on the U.S.'s good side, they may be more tempted to lash out now, saying, hey, we may be next. The U.S. is starting to get back into its imperialism. We may be next. So do we wait until we're invaded, or do we preemptively strike? And that's something that concerns me a little bit about the U.S. essentially escalating this conflict in the Middle East, or in the Holy Land. So, well, it was in the Holy Land. Now it is throughout the Middle East. So we'll have to wait and see what happens as a result of this. I'll talk about where I think this goes coming up after we watch this video. I may have another video to show you guys another news report on this before we go into anything else.
With ships. We don't know exactly which ones yet, but we do have the name of the submarine that was used. This is a guided missile submarine called the USS Florida. Very notable that the U.S. military is telling us tonight the name of the submarine. And they, both the surface ships and the submarine, fired these land missiles. These are essentially surface-to-surface missiles, Tomahawk missiles, against this more than a dozen locations inside Yemen. So a formidable amount of force brought to bear tonight in these strikes all across Yemen, Anderson.
And obviously, we don't know if this is the end of these strikes or if this will be an ongoing operation. Let's talk more about what's behind the U.S. decision to launch.
I can probably give you the answer to that. It's more than likely not the end. They more than likely did not get what they wanted out of this. So this may be an ongoing thing. I feel like this is just the beginning of the U.S., at least for now, essentially, for lack of a better term, and this term doesn't sound like it's militaristic, and you would think that it would be the other way around. But it's essentially the U.S. is being a soft power in the area, because the difference between soft and hard power is soft power is, yeah, you can do military operations, you can do things from the sea or from a distance, but you're not putting troops on the ground. So I think the U.S. will be a soft power in the area, at least for a while. Yemen isn't, like, they're not really friend or foe to us. They're kind of, obviously we have relations with them, but it's not like Saudi Arabia, where we are direct allies, But it's also not like Iran, where it's, we are definitely enemies. So, whether or not the U.S. decides to go any further with this, even just within Yemen, is still yet to be seen. Well, that's one thing. That's one thing that I think will determine whether or not this gets even crazier. Let me actually look that up. I'm curious to see. Let's see. What's their foreign relations like right now? Yeah, they don't really exactly. Yeah, so they're not exactly, you know, they're not exactly allies or enemies with any of the distinctive groups that are in this conflict currently. So it's not like you have it's not like it's Iran or it's not like Saudi Arabia where it's distinct. Okay, if we go into Iran, then they're going to go to war with us, and or even if we did, these missile strikes into Iran, they're going to go to war with us, and it's going to escalate things. Uh, or it's not like it's Saudi Arabia where the government within Saudi Arabia would, well, although that's not exactly true either, because back with Osama bin Laden and whatnot, the Saudis were the ones funding him because it was, they had that similar Wahhabism ideology. But with this, it's much more complex, or not really. It's actually kind of simpler, where the U.S. can basically do whatever they want to Yemen, and it doesn't really matter on a... Obviously, it does matter on a global stage when it comes to how other countries think of us. But in terms of escalating the conflict, it doesn't directly impact things. So that's why this, in and of itself, probably won't impact anything.
Launch the strikes now.
Well, quite simply, as I think MJ was just saying, this was the strikes that we saw, or the attempted attacks by Yemen just 2 days ago on Tuesday, the biggest yet, involving drones, ballistic and cruise missiles, was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. There have been repeated warnings by the U.S. and others to the Houthis to essentially knock it off. We have seen the U.S. carry out responses against Iranian-backed militant groups in Iraq and Syria. We had not yet seen any kind of U.S. response against the Houthis in Yemen, and that is in...
The Houthis are Iranian-backed, but very similar to Hamas and Hezbollah and other groups that are either directly or indirectly supported by Iran. It's basically like a proxy war, where if the larger power attacks the supporters or the underlings, if the primary power attacks the proxies, then it doesn't matter. That's why the U.S. was, during the Cold War, was able to do things in like Vietnam and Korea and stuff like that. Those countries were proxies of the larger superpower, but because the superpowers did not directly... Well, they did get directly involved, but because it wasn't directly superpower against superpower, there was no risk of that ultra escalation, which a lot of people... ever since the Cold War equates to, either nuclear war or World War III. And I will talk about this more in depth in a moment, but let's...
In large part because they do threaten this waterway. But essentially, having choked this off, the U.S. now trying to send the message to the Houthis that they need to back down. They're essentially trying to punch them in the nose, bloody them, and get them to stop. Whether that will work, Anderson, is now the major question. Of course, the big foe here in the region is Iran. They back forces in Yemen, in Iraq and Syria, in Lebanon with Hezbollah, of course, and then Hamas in Gaza. So, as Oren was saying, the Houthis have...
Yeah, like he just said right there. Iran is allies with all these groups. but it would be my guess that unless the U.S. now if the U.S. went after all of Iran's client states, then you could potentially see Iran saying, we're backed in a corner, so we have to do something because all of our client states, all of our allies are being taken out. But if that's not the case, if the U.S. only goes after one or two, obviously right now going after the Houthi in Yemen, but even if the U.S. were, say, to go after, get more directly involved in Israel against Hamas, or whatnot, just one or two, I don't think would be enough to make Iran do anything about it at this point. So, and Egypt isn't doing anything right now. Hezbollah, yeah, they're kind of involved, but not over the top involved. So, that's the position that we're in right now. I'll talk about more what I think will happen momentarily and what this means for the world at large. But that's just my general thoughts as of right now.
Vowed to respond. So it remains to be seen whether there will be some kind of escalation here or whether the U.S. and these other countries have sent the message that they are intending to send tonight. This is absolutely critical, not just in terms of the potential for a widening war, but for global commerce because of the amount of shipping.
Like I said, I don't think this will make... I don't... Honestly, I don't think it's going to do much of anything. And here's why. Iran is not going to escalate the conflict over their client states and over their allies being attacked. But at the same time, because it's not them being directly threatened, I don't think they'd stop either. This is basically, I think what this will end up becoming is essentially a U.S. versus Iran partial proxy war. Think of it like, like I said, think of it like Korea and Vietnam. Yes, you had the local population fighting on one side or the other, but you also, obviously the U.S. was more directly involved, but you also had China sending troops, especially in Korea. Think of it, yeah, this is going to be very similar to Korea, I think, where both the U.S. and Iran will send troops in to fight a proxy war that, but it won't get any further than that.
That goes through here. Now you have ships being forced to not go through the Red Sea, instead go south around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, which makes things a lot more complicated, a lot more expensive.
Anderson. Yeah, we should point out a senior member of the Houthis, Abdul Salam Jahaf, made a statement on Thursday warning, quote, "We will confront America, make it kneel down, burn its battleships and all its bases and everyone who cooperates with it, no matter the cost." He went on to say, "We will tread on America with our feet." Remains to be seen what, if any, response they may have to this latest attack. Just moments ago, CNN's Manu Raju got a statement supporting the strikes from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. It reads in part, and I quote, "President Biden's decision to use military force against these Iranian proxies is overdue. The United States and our allies..."
See, McConnell said it himself. This is against the proxies, not against the... I wouldn't even necessarily call Iran a superpower, but against the main power itself. And it's going to be very interesting because it's going to be interesting to see how this impacts public opinion here in the U.S. because traditionally, you would think, okay, Republicans would be all for this, Democrats would be against it. They want peace, but in reality, the dynamic has shifted to where, at least according to what they claim, now this is going to be the big test as things do escalate. Trump is talking about, oh, Biden's going to get us into World War III, acting as though he wants peace. But the traditional Republican thought process, at least the old school, the neoconservative thought process was always, war hawk. And certainly like someone like Nikki Haley would probably agree. I don't know where DeSantis is, and I don't know where Trump is on this, because at least amongst Trump supporters, they'll try to claim that not so much that they're peaceful, they're certainly not peaceful, but Trumpers will say that they're America first and focus on things here in the U.S. and don't worry about whether it's proxy wars or what have you. And for some reason, yeah, my thing has been acting screwy. Hold on a second. Let me. Okay. Hopefully I fixed it. But unfortunately, yeah, okay. So that's not the point. That's not the point I'm trying to make. This has nothing to do with economics, though. Whether I agree with you or not on that. But that's going to be the big question of whether this, where this goes from here in terms of, not just over there and how this impacts things, but how it impacts things here in the U.S. when it's an election year.
This must leave no room to doubt that the days of unanswered terrorist aggression are over. Joining us now, two former NATO Supreme Allied Commanders, retired Army General Wesley Clark and retired Air Force General Philip Breedlove. With us as well from Israel, CNN International diplomatic editor Nick Robertson. General Clark, let me start with you. I'm wondering what your reaction is to news of these strikes. What do you make of what we've seen so far?
Well, I think it's a good first step. I think it could have happened sooner. I'm glad we have a coalition. When you're dealing with something like this, Anderson, you don't want to have to do this in the first place. But when you do, you must attain escalation dominance. So I didn't see anything in the reports about taking out the boats. So they're boats. They've been used to try to attack shipping. We should take out the boats, take out every means that the Houthis have to get at these shipping areas, wherever the minefields are, the mines are stationed. Now the Iranians pulled their destroyer back, so they're trying to run from this, and that's the next step, is to do something with Iran. But for now, it's on the Houthis, and so they either stop.
So he's wanting to escalate things with Iran, which I'll talk about what I think should happen momentarily.
Or we will have to escalate what we're doing. It's all a matter of getting the targeting. The intelligence is so critical. We can strike anything in there and probably hit it if we know what we're after. So I'm sure we've been preparing this strike package for a while, but we're going to have to probably go back again and harder. And it's a game, and they're learning from our strike. They're figuring out what we know. So this is just the beginning of this, unfortunately.
General Breedlove, do you have a sense of how sophisticated the Houthis are in terms of the weaponry that?
Well, remember that all roads in the Middle East lead back to Iran. So they are being fed capabilities that are beyond what they would have created in their country. This is what this is all about. We have a strategic defensive issue. We have lost what deterrence we've had in this area: 130 strikes against our people, 27 against international shipping, one boat. And so our deterrence has to be regained, and we've lost the initiative. We are now reactive rather than proactive. And I think this is the first step to begin to be proactive and try to reestablish deterrence, much like Wes and others just talked about. We have to make Iran and all of their proxies understand that they will have to pay a cost for the things they're doing. It's a little slow in coming.
Like I said before, though, I'm not sure if that would necessarily work now, because I'm sure Iran is seeing what's going on in the Holy Land with Palestine, and the U.S. basically standing back and saying, Israel, go do what you need to do. We don't care. So they may be thinking, we're next. So they may lash out as a result of this.
But now maybe we will begin to regain that initiative and reestablish the deterrence that we once held in this area.
So, General Breedlove, in terms of the Houthis, what does that look like? I mean, General Clark had talked about going after mines, after boats that they have access to. I mean, how many other kind of targets do you think there are? How long could this go on for?
Well, I think there are many yet to be struck. We heard today that they were moving some of their best kit into bunkers that were built for a different part of a different war. And so they know we're coming after them. And the good news is, I think we demonstrated to them today that we have good intelligence of where they are, because we did strike valued targets today. And I think we just have to increase the cost, as Wes mentioned, increase the cost so that they know this is not going to be a profitable venture.
So that was that first video. Let me see. I think there was something. There's a few other videos that I wanted to show you before I get my overall thoughts on this.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And that breaking news on this Friday morning: growing concerns about an escalating conflict in the Middle East after the U.S. and British militaries launched retaliatory strikes against multiple Houthi targets in Yemen. We're just going to show you new video just released by the UK Defense Ministry. Over the course of the last several hours, 5 people were killed and 6 were injured, according to a Houthi military spokesman. A U.S. military official says a significant percentage of Houthi assets were destroyed. 16 locations were hit, including command centers, weapons depots, and launching systems that were targeted.
So these strikes, of course, come after weeks of repeated drone strikes and missile attacks by those Iran-backed Houthis on commercial ships in the Red Sea. Attacks that have forced more than 2,000 ships to divert thousands of miles around the Red Sea. That, of course, is causing major delays and directly impacting the global economy. And the U.S. for weeks has tried to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from spreading conflict in the region, repeatedly warning the Houthis about possible retaliation.
If it doesn't stop, there'll have to be consequences, and unfortunately it hasn't stopped. But we want to make sure that it does, and we're prepared to do that.
Those warnings have now turned to action, and President Biden is not ruling out more military action, saying in his statement, quote, "I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and the free flow of international commerce as necessary." We have team coverage on this very important morning. Our experts are standing by, and CNN's Natasha Bertrand is at the Pentagon.
where we begin. There have been warnings, Natasha, for weeks from top U.S. officials that this could happen. It now has happened. What are the expectations going forward?
Well, the Houthis are already responding, and they are saying that they are going to retaliate. The extent to which they actually can after the strikes last night remains unclear. But the Houthi deputy foreign minister released a statement saying, quote, "Our country was subjected to a massive aggressive attack. America and Britain will undoubtedly have to prepare to pay a heavy price and bear all the dire consequences of this blatant aggression." Now, of course, as you mentioned, the Houthis had been warned for several weeks and months that if they did not stop, then the U.S. would not hesitate to strike back and would not hesitate to take action to make them stop. And of course, the U.S. was able to pull together this coalition of countries to support a response, a very controversial one, one that was actively debated within the Biden administration for quite some time because they were hesitant about escalating the war any further and hesitant about upsetting a very delicate truce that has been brokered by the U.S. and the UN inside Yemen over the last several years. Now, just to remind viewers, the Houthis are an Iran-backed group that emerged in the 90s out of the Yemen civil war, and the members belong to a branch of Shia Islam, and the group currently controls most of northern Yemen. They are a very powerful group, and over the course of several years of a war with Saudi Arabia, the Saudis were not really able to degrade them to the point where they no longer were able to control that significant portion of Yemen. So the question now is, will these massive strikes, really over 60 locations were targeted, over 60 targets were hit across 16 locations by the U.S. and the U.K., is that going to be enough to degrade the Houthis' capabilities to continue these strikes on Red Sea shipping? That remains an open question. As you said, a senior military official did say last night that the percentage of the targets that were hit is, quote, significant, Phil.
So, kind of, like I said before, they're not, they're enemies of Saudi Arabia, but they're not exactly, big players in the international sphere. So that's why the U.S. feels like they can do this without really angering any major powers that and they're also doing it to help their allies in Saudi Arabia as well. So it's kind of it works in multiple ways. They're using this both to attack Iran and also to help the Saudis.
All right, Natasha Bertrand live from the Pentagon. Thank you.
Let's bring in now CNN political and national security analyst and White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times, David Sanger, and CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Good to see both of you this morning. David, just sort of picking up where Natasha left off there, our colleague Stephen Collinson with, as always, brilliant analysis this morning. One of the things he wrote that stood out to me was the real need here, that the credibility of U.S. power was on the line, he wrote, and it was imperative to reestablish some form of deterrence because those calls for deterrence were not working. David, when will...
That's... Like I said, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work. Yes, self-preservation and everything, but I wonder if at this point, a country like Iran is saying, well, look what the U.S. is accepting of happening in Palestine, so why not, we're probably next, so why not, why bother trying to be peaceful?
Will the U.S. know whether that was actually effective and that goal was achieved?
Erica, it's a really good question because the fine line here is between actual reestablishing deterrence and the provocation of a continuing war. And that's been the debate that's been taking place.
That's exactly what I was saying was, yes, you can think of this in terms of deterrence, but you can also think of it in terms of, is this going to escalate things further? And that's yet to be seen. That will be seen over the coming days.
place within the White House for weeks now. They could have done these strikes 2 weeks ago. They could have done them 2 months ago. The reason they didn't want to was that they were concerned about opening essentially a third front in the war. Obviously, Gaza's one. Increasingly, Lebanon and that the Hezbollah attacks from there are a second. And here, they wanted to do something that would basically quiet this problem. And of course, it's the Red Sea problem that is going to most affect consumer prices. It's the Red Sea problem that's going to most affect whether shipping resumes. We now have seen a wide variety of.
That's the reason why I'm going to be very curious to see. Now, Trump himself is obviously going to say, "Oh, this is because of Biden and his weakness and all of this." So he's going to use this escalation as political fodder. But I wonder what his base would say about this, considering they claim they're America first. They claim that they not in so many words they claim they are isolationist. They don't want to get involved in these proxy wars, or at least that's what they've been saying. Obviously, on a foreign policy level, Trump never had to directly deal with anything like this. At least not to the level that we have now. But it's going to be very interesting to see if, for one, what Trump says he would do, which he'd probably, what I gather, what I'm assuming he'd say is he'd claim that he would somehow be able to get this fixed through negotiation somehow, which I don't think is the case, but that's what he would say, is that, me, the master negotiator, would have been able to figure out how to get through this.
Companies say they can't get parts or can't get parts on time because they close off the Red Sea.
But
it's a hugely
what I was going to say there, which it makes it very interesting to see. I'm curious to see what Trump and his supporters say, especially Trump, because of his focus on economics. This is definitely, well, unfortunately, I'll talk about where I think we go from here in a moment after this video, but I don't think this is going to be, the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to the economy. But we may have a bit of a dip, but I don't think we're going to get what Trump wants, which is a recession or depression. But we'll have to, that's something that will happen over the next couple of days. Obviously, today being Friday, I'm going to take the weekend off, so I may have a lot of stuff to talk about when I get back from the weekend on Monday. The world may be completely different by then. I don't think it will be. I don't think this is going, like I said, I'm going to talk about this more in depth in a moment. But I don't think this is going to escalate like crazy over the next few days. But it will be interesting to see what Trump and his supporters response is to this. Obviously, a lot of them are going to say, oh, this is Joe Biden's fault. And if Trump were in office, this would have never happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder what they would say in terms of... A lot of them are probably just going to focus entirely because it is a cult. They'll just focus entirely on, oh, if Trump were in office, this would have never happened, and not actually talk about the reality of the situation. So that's my general thought, at least amongst his supporters. Trump himself will probably also just blame this on Biden and won't even say anything related to the economic issues regarding it. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next few days.
Consequential geopolitical issue right now. Colonel Layton, when you step back and look at the scale of the operation that was conducted last night, a joint operation with the U.S. and its allies, what does it tell you about the intent here?
The intent, I think, Phil, good morning to you, is to make sure that the Houthis really can't cut trade in the Red Sea as it transits through the Red Sea. And so as a result of that, the way that they did this was really designed to hit the Houthis hard, hit them once or maybe twice, and then hopefully that will be it. But I think we have to be prepared for more actions to happen, for the Houthis to respond one way or the other, because they will have ways, in spite of these very substantial strikes, they will have ways to try to reach out and attack shipping in the Red Sea and in other areas as well.
Colonel, to that point, what are you watching for then in the coming days, and where are you watching?
So what I'm looking at, Erica, are some of the movements that the Houthis are going to undertake. They are, are they going to be able to repair some of their damaged radars to some of their airfields? Are they going to be able to launch drone strikes? That's probably one of the most important aspects of this. Are they going to be launching cruise missiles and ballistic missiles against the targets in the Red Sea? And will they also try to go after targets in Saudi Arabia or even Israel as a result of this? And will others join them? Will the Iranians show their hand? I don't think they will at this point in time, but it's definitely something to watch. And will other Iranian proxies also join in this? Those Iranian proxies, extending all the way from Iraq to Lebanon to...
I'll give you my thoughts on that. I don't think Iran will directly get involved with this, at least currently. But I do think the proxies, this is going to become, this escalation will create essentially what a lot of people thought the war on terror was going to become. And it's going to essentially become a giant Middle East proxy war. It'll be, Saudi Arabia, Israel, U.S. These countries aren't going to, they'll indirectly be fighting. They may be sending troops here and there and everywhere. But I don't think we'll actually get any sort of ground invasions or anything like that. But it's going to be the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israel, and their allies in the Middle East against, the militant groups that are funded by Iran and Egypt and Lebanon. So it'll be, again, it'll essentially be a whole Middle East conflict, but mostly in terms of what the U.S. Now, obviously, Israel is a little different because they're directly in it, and Saudi Arabia, I don't necessarily know what happens with them because they're. I don't know if say let's say Iran or Yemen were to attack Saudi Arabia directly. I don't know if because of U.S. interests in the country, especially because of oil and stuff like that, that may be something that would escalate the conflict even further. But that's yet to be seen. I don't think that would happen for the same reasons that. I mean, like I said, Iran has the choice now at this point. Do we leave this as a proxy war and just let our militants, let our proxies fight the battle for us? Or do we get more directly involved? Now, what direct involvement means is up in the air as well, because does direct involvement mean just simply doing something to essentially try to provoke the U.S., or is it directly attacking, say, Saudi Arabia or Israel or whatnot? So that's going to be the big question there, because I personally, I think this just stays a proxy war. I do not think it will be escalated unless Iran thinks it is directly threatened. Unless they think, okay, look what's going on in Israel right now with our allies Hamas. We may be next. This may be the moment where the U.S. says, you know what? This was the last straw. We're just going in and completely overtaking the Middle East, all of the Middle East, or at least, maybe not Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia just because they're under our thumb. But taking over Yemen, taking over Iran. The only reason why I don't think this will happen, though, at the same time, is because the last two times that the U.S. has tried to directly intervene and directly impose their will in the Middle East, it has ended horribly. Now, I know that the U.S. Has a very short memory, but it's. I mean, hell, Trump is still talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So it's still, at least Afghanistan is still fresh in the minds of not just the U.S. not just the U.S. population, but you would have to imagine U.S. politicians. So I don't think this will. I don't think this will escalate on that front, but only time will tell what happens. But like I said, I think it's all, at this point at least, it's all dependent upon what Iran does. At a certain point, though, I could see a situation where the U.S., if Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, they always start with H's. I just had to say that. Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran, they just won't stop. And, I mean, as we've seen time and time and time again, whether it's in the Middle East or it was in Vietnam, it is very, and I mean, even throughout history, look at the American Revolution, look at the French Revolution, look at the Haitian Revolution, uh, look at to a lesser extent. I mean, the U.S. was able to wipe them out, but to a lesser extent, look at how long it took the U.S. to complete the Native American extermination. That guerrilla warfare is very hard when it's guerrilla war. When it's guerrilla warriors against a superpower, it is very hard for the superpower. Even though the U.S. should be used to it. I mean, that's basically outside of Korea. That's basically all the U.S. has fought since the Cold War. So you would think that the U.S. would know how to do this by now. But the U.S., for whatever reason, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not, guerrillas have a much higher chance when they're on their own soil. They have the advantage when they're on their own soil because they know the terrain, they know the environment, they know streets and buildings and all of that. But you would still think that the U.S. would be a little better at anti-insurgency and guerrilla tactics at this point after fighting countless guerrilla wars over the last 70 years. But I mean, that's the issue that the U.S. now the U.S. may think that they have a better chance this time around against a state like Iraq. Well, but again, look at Iraq and to a much lesser extent Afghanistan, because Afghanistan didn't really have a full-fledged government at the time anyway. They were run by the Taliban, who were the successors to the Mujahideen. They were always more guerrilla fighters anyway. That's just how they operated. But the U.S., they ran a blitzkrieg into Iraq, captured Baghdad within a couple of days, basically bypassed all of the real troops of the Iraqi army, captured Baghdad, and, they thought, okay, we captured Baghdad, we're done. But that wasn't the case. Then they had to fight an insurgency, which ultimately failed. Well, the U.S. ultimately failed. Their counterinsurgency ultimately failed. So the concept that, the U.S. is just going to go into Iran and, and capture Tehran and win the war, that's only half the battle. And another issue that the U.S. has both at home and abroad is that the way you fix counterinsurgencies and the way you stop counterinsurgencies, or the way you stop insurgencies, is not through weapons. I may have to pull up. Maybe I won't do it today. But I may have to show you guys the battle plan episode. If you guys, for those of you who are younger, you probably don't remember it, or those of you who are not into history and military history as much as I am. There was a show back in the day. I forget if it was on the history. No, I think it was on the military channel called Battle Plan, where it talked about various battle plans, various strategies, and talked about the keys and the keys to victory and the objectives, or the goals that you must set in order to win certain battles or certain operations. And one of them was guerrilla warfare. And one of the objectives, or one of the keys to winning a guerrilla warfare, is hearts and minds. You have to win over the population so that your operation is not, whether inadvertently or advertently, creating more insurgents. And that's something that, whether, even, even in Vietnam, their strategy of hearts and minds was essentially, and this has a lot to do with American arrogance and thinking that we are the best country in the world and the best system in the world, no matter what. But the American strategy for hearts and minds in both Vietnam and in Iraq was basically, well, in Vietnam it was, we're protecting you from the evil communists. And you should be thanking us for it. When a lot, at least at the time, yes, a lot of Vietnamese did agree with that in the South, but there were a lot that were like, okay, yes, but the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese are promising us food and, and a better life. What are you giving to us? And that's something that the U.S. failed on. And it's very much the U.S. It's ironic that the U.S. is so poor at this, because you would think that they would understand, based around their own political climate, and not just within politics. Think about sports and just culture. Maybe not so much culture, but the U.S., when it comes to the population, when it comes to both politics and sports, it is very much a "what have you done for me lately" thought process. It is what, they only see past, a few weeks or a few months or a year. So if they think that you're not giving them what they want, then they're going to look elsewhere. The same concept holds true elsewhere in the world. So if you're not, and I mentioned this yesterday when it came to Central and South America, when it came to the immigration problem. I forget, it might have been the other day. I think it was the other day, actually. No, it might have been yesterday. But either way, although, to be fair, and after watching a few other videos about the topic, I may be wrong, because the U.S. has a very sordid history when it comes to that. Yes, they've done some good things, but also in recent history, they've destroyed countries just because the country was not abiding by U.S. supremacy and capitalistic supremacy. But the U.S., you would think that they would know how to do this because of, things like the Marshall Plan. And if it wasn't for the Marshall Plan, if the U.S. went another route, which this may be another video, a YouTuber, Alternate History Hub, talked about this in regards to other options. The Marshall Plan was not the only option that was laid on the table for Germany post World War II. But there were other options that would have been much more cruel that the U.S. probably would have gone with nowadays. Or, well, if it was a non-European country, they certainly would have gone with that's the German plan. Never mind. The Morgenthau plan. There we go. Which was basically to cut off Germany from the rest of Europe and basically starve them out. That may be another video that I'll do one day. Especially depending upon how this goes and all of that. But yes, you can win the war against the government, but then, especially in the Middle East, you then have to fight against the inevitable insurgency. And unless you're winning hearts and minds, you're gonna have an uphill battle. And so that's why I feel like in a very messed up way, the U.S. is actually hoping that the next war that they have to fight is a conventional one, which would essentially require it to be World War III. But yeah, so that's why the U.S. or that's why you have to be worried about this potentially escalating, is because Iran may be thinking they're next. And they might be right. The U.S. may just say, you know what, forgetting what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the U.S. may say, you know what, screw it, we're going to change and that's another thing that the U.S. has an issue of, is they think they're the ultimate saviors and that everyone would love to be liberated by them. And as a result, the U.S. will just roll into an area, basically say and usurp the government and basically just say you're welcome without actually helping to create the society that they want. So that's... And a lot of it also has to do with the U.S. having, business interests and personal interests in the area. But, so that's that. Let's continue the video. Sorry, I went on a huge digression there.
They could potentially do something. The Hamas, of course, in Gaza is going to be occupied with the Israelis, but others are going to be able to do something that could upset the balance, perhaps in Iraq, perhaps in Syria, and perhaps in other parts of the Middle East.
David, we know White House officials informed congressional leadership in advance of these strikes that they were going to be happening. However, you did hear from some Democrats, House Democrats in particular, who are raising serious concerns about the legal authority behind this. I think using the words retaliatory and defensive were very intentional. We'll see the legal rationale soon from the administration. Take a listen to what Ro Khanna, the congressman from California, had to say.
The Constitution requires that if there is not an imminent threat of self-defense, that he has to come to Congress. And here we know by your own reporting that...
I mean... While I agree with what he's saying, this has been a moot point for a long time. Like, Yeah, the last time that Congress itself actually declared war was World War II. Let's see, military engagements authorized by Congress. Let's see here. Even this, the last time that even a military engagement was declared by Congress was the Iraq War, and that was in 2003, and I know for a fact that there's been more things done since then. There have been more military operations done since then. So this concept that Congress has to do something for this doesn't always work. It's good in theory. It should be the case, but it's not really.
And this has been going on since December. He's assembled an entire international coalition. He certainly should have come to Congress so that we can discuss whether this actually could put more American troops at risk. I'm concerned about retaliation in Iraq and whether it could draw us into a Middle East war.
David, we could have a 6-hour discussion about war powers and how this has been operated over the course of several decades, moving away from Congress. But do you think those concerns have merit?
Yeah, he just said it right there.
Yeah, there is some merit to
for decades now, essentially since the Iraq War, Congress has been out of the loop on a lot of things.
but the fact of the matter is the War Powers Act has very rarely been used in advance of these things. What you'll see is the president issue a notification probably in the next few hours about why he engaged here. I don't think the president's going to have a hard time making a case because it was just a week ago that we saw some of the Houthis open fire on U.S. Navy helicopters, and they responded by sinking those 3 ships. And then there were a barrage of 21 missiles and drones that came in the direction of American forces. But I think the president's going to be able to establish a pretty good case for why he took these out on the ground. The fact of the matter is the lesson we've learned from dealing with the Somali pirates and the other cases is you have to actually get at their onshore facilities. And I think the question that Cedric raised correctly is, have they gotten enough of those now to really hobble the ability of the Houthis to come back? And then there's the bigger question of Iran, which is, obviously that we are not striking inside Iran, but it's Iran that is at least coordinating, if not controlling, these groups.
David Sanger, Cedric Layton, appreciate your insight as always. Thank you.
So that is that this. I may talk about this a little more before we, but I may talk about this a little more before we, before I sign off this afternoon. But yeah, this is something that is going to be very interesting to watch over the next few weeks and the next few days of where does this go from here. Let me go through this real quick, because here's the reason why I don't think this is going to escalate. Here's the reason for why I don't think this is going to escalate much further than it is. Okay, these are the list. This is the nations that have nuclear weapons, and I've always wondered this, and especially with what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on, in the Middle East and all of that. we are getting closer and closer to, and with China threatening Taiwan and all of that, we are getting closer and closer to the major powers fighting for the first time since World War II. And it would essentially be World War III. But when everyone thinks of World War III, they automatically think, oh, it would create a nuclear holocaust. It would create nuclear war. Everyone would die. We'd all be screwed. I think that would be the case overall, but I don't think it would necessarily initially happen. And here's why. Let's look at the countries that have nuclear weapons. You have the US and Russia, who are the two biggest they have, they have the most, and those would be the biggest threats. And they are most definitely enemies. They are most definitely adversaries. But going beyond that, UK, France, they're both allies of the US. China is ally of Russia. India, ally of the US and the West. Pakistan, more hostile. North Korea, more hostile. Israel, allied. So, you have US, UK, France, India, and Israel against Russia, China, Pakistan, and North Korea. But those, yes, it's 5-4. It's pretty close. It's not like it's a huge discrepancy. But you look at the discrepancy of, armament and whatnot. Yeah, Russia has more total warheads than the U.S., but the U.S. has more deployed. But then the UK and France are the only other two that have any deployed. And then everyone else, China has the third most warheads total, but how good they are, is yet to be seen. And then everyone else doesn't have all that much. So the discrepancy of the amount is definitely on the side of the U.S. Although, Pakistan has a few. So it's not completely one-sided, but it's close. So, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I don't think anything's going to come of this. I don't think we're going to get into World War III or anything like that. But it's definitely going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on.